Joining me on the phones right now, Republican strategist Matt Mackowiak. Matt, good morning. How are you today?
Good morning, Chad. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Don't you think we'll hear some clarification out of the White House today as far as what exactly the Syrian policy is for U.S. troops?
Yeah, it's pretty unclear. And, the backlash, the bipartisan backlash is pretty fierce over the last, 24 to 30 or 32 hours. There's real concern about abandoning our Kurds, the allies, and who've been our allies, and really seeing them get slaughtered by Turkey. But this is complicated because, on the one hand, I think there's a genuine interest to try to reduce the American presence in the Middle East because we've been there so long, we've given and sacrificed so much. On the other hand, Turkey is both a bad actor and a NATO ally. So
yeah, exactly. Exactly. They're not really an ally of the United States, but we have to work with them.
Yeah. So look, I think there are huge questions here. You saw yesterday Lindsey Graham with Chris Van Hollen, the Democrat from Maryland, say if Turkey attacks the Kurds, that they're going to immediately put the harshest possible sanctions on Turkey's economy and do that in a bipartisan way. And Graham expects that would occur with a veto-proof majority in the Senate. So, look, I'm not sure I understand what the position is. I mean, other than the fact that we appear to be drawing down out of Syria, what are the rules of engagement here? What is Turkey allowed to do? What are they not allowed to do? Trump tweeted this morning that he wants to make sure the Kurds are protected. Well, who's doing that? Who's doing that protection if the Americans aren't there? So it's a mess, and there's no clarity. And it appears that Trump sort of overruled his Pentagon, State Department, and military general communities. They've got to provide some clarity going forward. And I think the bigger concern here in the longer term is just what does this mean for other potential partners, both in the region and around the world, if America is willing to abandon them in quick, in a hasty decision. Can you trust America's commitment? And I think there's real concern about what that means for American foreign policy.
Yeah, I'm visiting with Matt Mackowiak. Matt, we'll take it back to what's happening here in this country exclusively, and that is this impeachment inquiry, which is not an official inquiry yet because they haven't had a vote. But according to the Washington Post, 58% of Americans support an impeachment inquiry into President Trump. What do you make of that and what has been happening over the last week or so?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the polling is actually pretty confusing in the sense that I don't know that people generally understand the difference between an impeachment inquiry and impeachment.
Right.
And there is a pretty significant, difference. If you ask a lot of people, do you want to know more? Well, I guess 42% don't want to know more. So maybe that's Trump's, base or whatever, and that's fine. I mean, look, I'm in favor of knowing more. I sort of agree with the position Congressman Will Hurd of San Antonio has, which is he wants to hear from Rudy Giuliani and he wants to hear from Hunter Biden. And that's kind of where I am. I mean, I want to hear from as many people as possible, get more information. Now, I think this process the Democrats have set up is a total sham. It's one-sided. It's partisan. Republicans can't ask questions. They can't, invite witnesses. They can't compel testimony. They're not getting access to documents themselves. I mean, it's a total one-sided sham. And I think the Democrats are going to rue the day they did this. Because not only does it open the door to Republicans doing it if they get the majority back, if and when they get the majority back, but number two, they're not making impeachment bipartisan. And that's the only way it can succeed for the Democrats is if it is bipartisan and if the majority of the country supports it. So keep in mind, Chad, that the important thing is not whether the majority of the public supports an inquiry or whether Congress votes at the end of this. Does Congress take the impeachment vote? What is the vote? Count, and does Trump get impeached? Does it go to the Senate for trial? That's all that matters. And so the inquiry is all about whether there's enough information to convince a majority of the U.S. House to proceed with impeachment. And look, I think there's a difference between inappropriate and impeachable. I wish the president hadn't mentioned Biden on the call with the Ukrainian president. I don't think we should be asking foreign governments to investigate Americans. That said, I think there are very, very legitimate questions about Biden and his son, both in Ukraine and in China. Honestly, the Americans ought to be doing that investigation. Although if that was true, I'm sure the left would be crying about Trump using the government to investigate an opponent. So if the Americans can't investigate and the foreign governments can't investigate, they just want Biden not to be investigated at all.
Right.
And I guess that's their position. Look, I wrote this in my Washington Times column last week. I'm sorry I'm going on long here, but this is not about Biden. It's not really about collusion or campaign finance violations. It's all about getting ahead of what the Attorney General and U.S. Attorney John Durham are doing to get to the root of the Russian collusion delusion. This is, I think, going to be very to law, and they're trying to undermine those individuals in addition to the Secretary of State to get ahead of whatever conclusions they're going to draw from the investigation they've been doing for some time now.
Yeah. Visiting with Matt Mackowiak. Matt, do you think at the end of the day that Nancy Pelosi right now wants to have an impeachment vote, or at least an impeachment inquiry vote, or do you think she's doing this and they're holding off on an actual vote because they know this is just a big show right now and there's nothing impeachable?
I think that if they had 218 votes for an inquiry, they'd take the vote. And so they haven't. I think the other reason they haven't done it is that when you take an inquiry vote, you also set out the terms of how the impeachment inquiry will be conducted. And generally the minority has some rights in that process. Right now they don't have any rights. We had this interview with Ambassador Volker from the State Department late last week, and what the Democrats decided to do was selectively leak texts and tried to make it look bad rather than put the transcript of the entire interview out.
Yeah.
Now, apparently the transcript did leak, and got posted on the Federalist and a couple other places. And basically, the interview shows that Volker is basically confirming the Trump administration's position and undermining a lot of what the whistleblower has claimed. So these selective leaks, that's not how you run an impeachment inquiry, right? I mean, there's going to be evidence that helps Trump. There's going to be evidence that hurts Trump. You got to have all the evidence. Let the public weigh it. Let the elected members of the House weigh it, and then see where the chips fall. But to your question about impeachment, I don't think she wants to hold the vote yet because I don't think she has the support from the public that she's going to need.
Yeah.
And I'm actually not even sure they're going to hold an impeachment vote at the end of the day.
Yeah.
She's not going to risk her majority if the majority of the country doesn't support this. She's not going to run the 31 Democrats from Trump districts down that gauntlet and risk her majority.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Matt, did you see the piece yesterday? Elizabeth Warren apparently has been on during her stump speeches, talks about how she was fired as a public school teacher because she was visibly pregnant. I think it was the folks over at the Washington Free Beacon who did a little digging and found out, well, that's not completely accurate, that she was actually offered a job, basically the same job that she had the year before. And it appears as though, Matt, Elizabeth Warren still has a problem with the truth when it comes to her own personal biography.
Yeah, that's right. And, it's interesting because there's as you're kind of alluding to, there's a parallel here to the Native American ancestry claim she made, which she's now basically admitted was not accurate and not honest. She apologized at a Native American conference a month or so ago. So, yeah, I do think there's something building here, and I don't know if she's, stretching to try to create a biography that's compelling. I'm not quite sure what she's trying to do, but, lying about your biography is really risky because it comes to define who you are and the character, qualities that voters see in you, and it comes to define everything you say. If there's evidence you've been lying consistently, it's a real problem. I think, to be candid, I think it's a problem sometimes with the White House. I don't necessarily think the president wakes up every morning and says, what lie can I tell? But I do think that from time to time, he's not precise with language. He's not careful with language. And the press and the left take him literally instead of taking him seriously. And so at times he says things that are just not precisely accurate. So I think there's risk on both sides. A lot of that's baked to the cake in terms of Trump. In terms of Warren, it's a real risk. It's a risk that these questions are going to kind of swirl around her going forward. I saw yesterday she sort of doubled down on it even after the story came out. So, maybe she's confident, maybe something was misunderstood, Maybe she just wants to stick to her guns. I don't know. So, yeah, it's more questions that are gonna follow her around, and she's going to have to figure out what to say and how to handle it.
How worried do you think, and this final question I'll ask you before we let you go, Matt, how worried are the Democrats right now about their candidates? You know, with Bernie Sanders having basically a heart attack, with Joe Biden looking like continuing to look like a very, very weak front runner, and Warren not really being embraced by the establishment Democrats, how worried are they?
Yeah, I think they are worried. I was talking to a trade association yesterday in Dallas and made that same point. I think there is real concern on the Democratic side, and I think that's a big part of why this impeachment stuff is swirling, right? It took 2.5 years of slowly trying to make the case on Russia. We're now in like the second week of the Ukraine thing, and this is the thing that caused them to formally go after impeachment, not the Russia stuff. So I think they are very worried Trump's going to get reelected. That's why they're trying to weaken him or remove him from office if they can, trying to split the Republican voters behind him. I think all options are on the table right now. I know it seems like it's late since it's already October and you're basically less than 4 months from Iowa. I'll tell you, there's some chatter, and I don't know that there's any hard evidence yet, but there's some real belief that Hillary may be looking at jumping in with Biden kind of becoming fairly weak. She's still doing a lot of speaking. She tries to stay in the news. She's making the rounds. You can't jump in now if you're not a known person who could raise a lot of money quickly. And she's the kind of person that could do that. I don't necessarily think there's a lot of enthusiasm for Hillary, but I do think there's a lot of concern in the mainstream Democratic Party that Warren can't win. Warren can't win. Bernie can't win. And Biden is so weak that he may be a Hillary-like candidate from last time in terms of being kind of lifeless. So, yeah, it's funny. I mean, their candidates in the top three are all really flawed in different ways, and I think Democrats are concerned about that. Could it give an opportunity for someone like Pete Buttigieg or someone else to move up potentially? We'll have to see how the debate goes on October 15th.
Yeah. Matt, tell folks about your podcast and your newsletter.
Yeah, the newsletter is called Must Read Texas. We take all the top news from around the state, put it in a clean, easy-to-read email, and deliver it to inboxes for more than 3,000 Texans each weekday morning by 9 a.m. You can sign up for a free one-week trial at mustreadtexas.com. The podcast is called Mac on Politics. You can find it in the iTunes Store, on Google Play, on Stitcher, and on Spotify.
All right. As always, Matt, appreciate your time. We'll talk to you later on.
Thanks, Chad. Take care.
Thank you. That's Matt Mackowiak here on the Chad Hasty Show.